Hello and welcome to the lecture series on basic cognitive processes. I am Dr. Ark Verma from IIT Kanpur. We have been talking in the last few lectures about memory. Today will be the last lecture on memory. We will be talking about everyday memory and memory errors. Now, when I say everyday memory, I am basically talking about memory as we know it, memory as we talk about memory. We talk about memories of events, we talk about memories about episodes in our life, we talk about memories of people, memories of small skills that you might have learned, but we do not really describe how we learned those skills. But say for example, an interesting episode that happened once you are learning to drive, or an interesting episode that you happened when you attended a particular class, and things like that. Now, that is the kind of memory we know and we have been talking about, and we have been let us say studying about in the past few lectures as well. But today we will look into it from a different perspective. We look into how memories play a role in our daily lives, and also we will spend a considerable amount of time in talking about whether and how we make errors about memory. So, you will see the topic of the lecture today is everyday memory, memory about everyday events and people and stuff like that, and also memory errors. Do we make errors in memory? Is our memory 100% correct all the time? So, we will spend a considerable amount of time on this. We will try and see whether our memory is accurate or not. If it is not, then why it is not accurate? What are the factors, what are the sources that make our memory less accurate than we assume it to be? If you ask a layperson, if you ask people generally about how good or how bad their memory is, some of them might say that, you know, my memory is not very good, I do not remember details of events, I do not remember names of people or faces of people, or say for example, I do not remember you know, things about, say for example, numbers and you know, figures and those kind of things. Now, that is one way of describing memory. We will probably talk about cases where people do remember stuff, say for example, episodes, entire episodes about, let us say, a birthday party that you celebrated you know, 20 years ago. You might remember all of that in a lot of detail, but is everything that you are remembering correct? Is everything that you are remembering part of your memory? So, those are the kind of questions we will talk about. You know, generally people are very confident. A lot of people will say that, you know, I have a photographic memory. What is actually, you know, what do they mean by saying photographic memory? Do they remember everything in as much detail as a photograph has, or let us say they are just merely confident? And you know, and these aspects of memory are very important, and they play a major role in a lot of areas you know, in our life. Say for example, the criminal justice system, the confidence with which a particular eyewitness describes his or her recollection of a particular you know, criminal act or criminal event kind of definitely influences the judges or the jury about you know, whether this person is identifying the correct criminal or not, or say for example, if this person remembers the entire event in adequate detail or not. Now, these are cases wherein these you know, the accuracy of memory actually becomes very important, and there has to be a way to know whether and what the person is remembering is correct or not. Also, it is important to realize that a lot of times we do not ourselves know that whether our memories are correct or not. A lot of times you would say that, no, I remember confidently that this person had met me in you know, place X, and we were doing you know, some action Y or something like that, and to your surprise, sometimes somebody would come and tell you, no, I am not that person, or probably I did not meet you there, I met you at a different place. We are doing something different than you are saying. And those kind of corrections, you know, sometimes they come as a big surprise, sometimes people do not believe them. They are very important in the sense of understanding that our memories are not always accurate. Now, let me begin the lecture of today by talking about somebody who believes that her memory is you know, correct most of the time. So, this is the memory, this is the recollection from a patient called AJ, and this patient had this photographic memory. She said, say for example, I will just read this excerpt out for you, which is from Goldstein's book. She says, I am 34 years old, and since I was 11, I have had this unbelievable ability to recall my past. I can take a date between 1974 and today and tell you on what day it falls, on what I was doing in that day, if there was anything of great importance that occurred around that time, and these details. This person says that whenever I see a date flashing on the television, I am transported to that place automatically. I remember all of that happened on that particular day in almost vivid detail. Okay. Now, the thing is this, this becomes a slight hazard for the person as well, because it is non-stop, it is uncontrollable, and it becomes rather exhausting for the person. You might enjoy something like this happening for a short while, but if it is happening continuously, it is out of your control, and it is happening with each and every date that you are reading somewhere, it can become that much of a hassle. So, this patient AJ basically contacted James McGaugh, who was a researcher in UCLA, and James McGaugh basically conducted a series of tests of the details of which you might find in a paper by Parker, Cahill and McGaugh published in 2006. But this is interesting because this person describes her memories as happening automatically and not under her conscious control. It's like you tell the date to the person and the person is almost time traveling to that instant and living the entire day. Now, this is interesting. So, when given a date, she could actually within seconds relate all the personal experiences, also any special events that might have happened that day, and these recollections prove to be accurate if checked against a diary of daily events that this person has been keeping for almost 24 years. Also might have come out as true if it were cross checked with other people around that time or around that person at that time. Now, these memories basically, because they are constantly out of her control and they are triggered all the time, started causing this person distress, and she says that it's a trouble for me turning this kind of movie off, and I cannot forget the negative events from the past, though positive memories also kind of keep the balance okay. Now, this is something which one should reflect upon and say that in life there are so many things that happen. There might be good things that are happening, there might be bad things that are happening. Memories of everything, there is a reason why we do not constantly remember everything, because we have to move on in life. So, if somebody is suffering from this kind of a disorder, I will not really call it a disorder, but this kind of an ability wherein everything is almost alive all the time. Whenever you see a date, you can remember all the negative things, all the positive things as well. It becomes kind of problematic after a point. Now, these kind of memories of your experiences in a given time frame is referred to as autobiographical memory. These are memories for personal experiences. What was happening with you when you were at a particular point in time? What was happening with you, let us say, when you are at a given place on a given date? What was going on? Say for example, what was happening on a particular date, say for example 20th September in 2015. If you can remember all of that in detail, let us say some of your birthdays might be on that day, and you remember the party, you remember the kind of cake that was there, you remember the kind of people that you invited, what all happened during that party, that is basically part of what is called autobiographical memory. Now, let me try and formally define this. So, autobiographical memory has been defined as recollected events that belong to a person's past. So, it is obviously about the past and it is basically, for example, things like what I have been talking about. So, an autobiographical memory of a childhood birthday party might include images of a cake, people at the party, games being played, all those kind of things. Okay. Now, this memory or autobiographical memories are slightly complex. They are more complex than something that might be measured in a laboratory. We have been talking about in the past, in the last 3, 4, 5 lectures about the kind of recall tests that were taken. Simply we were talking about somebody giving a particular list of fruits, of animals, of objects, and we asked the participants to learn that list, and a recall test can be taken easily. But autobiographical memory is that much more complex to test, because first you do not really have a way to verify, other than in the case of AJ there was a diary that she was maintaining. You might as well have people around that person who might verify that, but also because of the fact that these memories are more often than not charged with some emotional information, they are charged with details that you cannot really verify, and they also have a lot of, let us say, things that the person might have made up. So we'll talk about this made up part in a short while, but the point here is just to say that these autobiographical memories are multidimensional because they contain information about the spatial location, where I was at that point in time, what was I doing, where was I sitting. Suppose, say for example, I am in a particular restaurant, I was sitting on that particular table, we ordered this food for the dinner, those kind of things. They would also have emotional components. I was happy, I was sad, I was in a bad mood, I was in a good mood, I was so happy this thing had happened, I was anticipating, all of those details. Also, a lot of times these autobiographical memory have sensory components as well. So you might have vivid images, you might have vivid sounds that that you are reliving at that point in time. You might also have things like, I tasted this particular dish at that restaurant and it was amazing. So autobiographical memory in that sense is a much more complex form of memory. That is why I say this is the memory we generally talk about when you are talking about memory in the layman term. Okay, so it's not completely as simple as the experimental tests of memory that we have been doing. Let us talk about some experiments that have been done in this area now. Greenberg and Rubin, they found that patients who had lost their ability to identify or recognize visual objects because of a damage to the visual areas of the cortex, mainly the occipital lobe and associating areas, also experienced a loss of the autobiographical memory. So the visual component of the autobiographical memory might be damaged if you have damage in the occipital lobes of the brain. Cabeza and workers in 2004, they measured the brain activation caused by two sets of stimulus photos. So they conducted this experiment in their lab in Duke University, and these photos were taken by 12 Duke University students. They were basically asked to take 40 pictures of the campus over a 10-day period. Pictures that these people took themselves were called autobiographical photos, and there were 40 other photos that were taken by somebody else of the same places. So I will show you the figure here. So you can see there are autobiographical photos and there are laboratory photos. Again, this is sourced from Goldstein's book and the chapter on memory, and this is basically the kind of photos that these people were taking. Now, after taking the photographs, each participant was shown his or her photos, autobiographical photos that is, and photos taken by the other participants, so which are called laboratory photos. Now, a few days later, again they were called in the lab and they were shown the laboratory photos they had seen before and some new photos which they had not seen. They were asked to indicate whether the stimulus was an autobiographical photo, a seen laboratory photo, or a new laboratory photo. So they were basically asked to tell, this is the picture, where have I sourced this from? Is it the picture that you took? Is it the picture that you have seen earlier and was a laboratory photograph, or is it a new laboratory photograph which you have not seen earlier? And while these people were making these recognitions, they were also in the scanner. So fMRI was on and they were basically being scanned. So the brain scans of these participants showed that while autobiographical and laboratory photos both activated some of the same structures in the brain, mainly the areas in the medial temporal lobe that are associated with episodic memory, the autobiographical photos also activated regions associated with processing information about self, with memory for visual space and those linked with recollection. So what it tells us, what this kind of result tells us, is that autobiographical photos have this extra component of self-based information, of information that is attached to the self. If you remember one of the earlier lectures, we have talked about the self-reference effect. We have talked about the fact that when you associate information to yourself, your recall of that information is better. Autobiographical memory is slightly similar in the sense that this memory is actually about you. So autobiographical memory or recalling events which are autobiographical in nature will, in addition to the medial temporal lobe areas, also activate the areas which are associated with self processing or self based information processing in your brain. Now moving ahead, one can also ask questions like what kind of memories typically come under or typically figure under autobiographical memory. What kind of memories are these and how do people recall them? What are all of the things that can figure here? So memories of things like personal milestones, transition points in your life, things like when you achieved something important, when you passed a very important exam, when something significantly good happened in your life. Also sometimes significantly traumatic events are also remembered. Things like transition points when you passed school, went to college, when you graduated from college and maybe went for a job, maybe when one of you, maybe say for example when some of you were married. All those transition points in the life are also significant portions of the autobiographical memory and are remembered and organized as such. So when you start thinking of these events, you are kind of also thinking about yourself placed in these situations. So you're not remembering these memories just as facts or just as episodes. There is this extra component of self-based processing here. Now, when participants over 40 generally are asked to remember these events in their lives, their memory is found to be high for recent events and for events experienced in the adolescence and early adulthood. Things like, say for example, events that happened when somebody was in their late teens and early 20s and those kind of events. Now, this enhanced information for this particular period is referred to as the reminiscence bump. So, you will see the figure here and you will see that while the memory for recent events is very good and the memory for too far off events is not really good, but there is this bump here. So, there is this age group between, let us say, as I was saying, early 20s and late teens, which is particularly vivid in participants' memories. You will see there is a slump of information from 25 onwards till, let us say, 40, but there is this significant bump in almost all the participants, and this is a memory of a 55-year-old person. So, this is basically interesting, and you can see, say for example, even if this was tested in case of emigrated people who emigrated at the age of 34, you will see that the emigration age kind of corresponds to this reminiscence bump, because this was such a significant event that was happening in these people's lives. They were shifting countries, they were arriving at a new place, maybe looking for a new job, maybe looking for new homes, those kind of things. So, that kind of correlates with this particular reminiscence bump. Also, it correlates with the fact that when something significant happens in life, the memory for those kind of events or memory for events around that time period are specially enhanced. Now, there could be possible explanations for this reminiscence bump, and Rathbone and co-workers basically propose that memory is enhanced for events that occur as a person's self-image or life identity is being formed. So, the kind of events I was mentioning, passing from college, getting a job or getting married, these kind of events do play an important role in forming your self-image. Do play, say for example, once you have passed college and you have come up with a particular job, that job kind of adds a lot to your self-image. Say for example, somebody becomes a doctor or somebody becomes an engineer or somebody becomes a marketing specialist. Now, you will start identifying as these professions. So you might start identifying that I am X and Y and I am a doctor. So, these kind of events are playing a particularly important role in forming your self-image. So, Rathbone and co-workers would say that because these events are playing such an important role in helping you form your self-image, that is why these memories are recalled much better than some of the other memories. Now, there is another angle to this. There is a cognitive hypothesis. The cognitive hypothesis basically proposes that there are periods of rapid change followed by eras of stability. These cause better and stronger encoding of memory. So, that is why these memories are remembered better. Say things like adolescence and young adulthood perfectly fit this kind of description. So, adolescence, or just when you are just transitioning into an adolescent, or say for example, when you are transitioning from an adolescent to a young adult in your 20s, those are especially times of turbulence, because quite a few things are happening. People at this point in time are going through a lot of turmoil, emotionally and otherwise, and these kind of things are generally followed by relatively stable areas in life, relatively stable periods. And so, these relatively stable periods might allow for better encoding of those events that happened in early adulthood or adolescence, and in that sense they would lead to better recall. Again, this is one of the other explanations of the same thing. Now, there is a third explanation as well. The third explanation is called the cultural life script hypothesis. Now, the cultural life script hypothesis basically says that events that happen in a person's life story, that is all the events in a person's person's life and a cultural life script, events happening that at a particular time. Say for example, when I was 18 years old versus when I was 24 years old versus say for example when I was 16 years old, these kind of events have some special significance in, when say for example if I sit down at some point in time to write my autobiography. And because these events are that much more important, that is why I will make special case for them and remember them much better than I will remember some of the other things that would have happened around that time. These are three possible explanations people have given to explain what is called the reminiscence bump. Okay, so reminiscence bump is what? Reminiscence bump is when you recall information from particular periods of time slightly better than periods after or before that particular period. So this is again a comparative of these three kinds of explanation: self-image, period of assuming somebody's self-image; cognitive, encoding is better during periods of rapid change; third is cultural life script. So culturally shared expectations, structured recall. So at that point in time, people are in your culture expecting you to get a job, or say people are in the culture expecting you to get married. So these kind of these kind of cultural importance laid on that particular period helps you better recall this, helps you better organize this kind of memory, and that is why the better recall is there. Now let us move further. There is also, as I was saying, in autobiographical memory an enhanced portion about emotion. There is enhanced aspect of emotion attached to it, and you can talk about many of the autobiographical memories. You might say for example, pause the video, take 10 seconds off, take a minute off and think of all of the information that you are remembering about your past from this moment backwards. If you are doing this experiment, what you might realize, and if you might want to tabulate this, you might realize that you remember particularly those events better that were associated with highly emotionally charged events, highly emotionally charged happenings, and this probably is the case with everybody. And that is why it is very important to look into the emotional component of autobiographical memory. So personal events such as say for example beginning or end of relationships, or say for example events that are experienced by many people simultaneously, something big say for example has happened, say for example the 9/11 attacks in the United States of America, these kind of events tend to be remembered much more easily and much more vividly than some of the less emotionally charged events. Say for example you went to the market to buy a pair of jeans is much less emotionally charged as compared to you went to a restaurant with a date, something very interesting happened in your family. So you have to kind of understand that why each of these events are being remembered better. Now Labar and Phelps in 1998 they tested the participants' ability to recall arousing words and neutral words immediately after they were presented, and they already observed better memory for the arousing words. Arousing words are those words that would create an emotional turmoil or an emotional disturbance in your mind. Say for example, if I say a word like disgusting, or if I say a word like calm, the word disgusting kind of has this extra negative valence attached to it, and it might be recalled slightly better than the word like stoic or calm or something like that. Okay, so already we know that emotional words are processed slightly specially in the memory and their recall is better. Now Dolkos and co-workers basically tested participants' ability to recognize emotional and neutral pictures 1 year after they were presented, and still observed better memory for emotional pictures. So somebody could show you a series of photographs, some mundane photographs, let us say everyday happenings, and some slightly charged, emotionally charged photographs. Say for example pictures of a birthday party, or say for example on the other hand pictures of an accident or something like that. And even after 1 year, people's memory for these emotional pictures have been found to be higher. So one can safely say at this point in time that emotional information is processed slightly differently than other kinds of information, and your recall for emotional information in that sense will be better. Let us say moving further, what is the area in the brain that might be helping us do it? So the amygdala, among all the areas of the brain that we have been talking about that are implicated in memory, amygdala seems to be the most important area in memorizing emotional information. Okay, emotional information, things associated with the positive emotions as well, and things associated with negative emotions like fear, etc. And the amygdala is supposed to be one of the very important areas in doing this. So I'll take an example. Dolkos and co-workers, they obtained fMRI scans when people were remembering a list of words things like the arousal and calm words, and this basically revealed a higher activity in the amygdala for the recall of emotional words. So, it is already been shown in some way that amygdala might be involved in recalling or encoding or retrieval of these emotional words. Now, also a case from neuropsychology, there was a patient called BP who had this amygdala damage, and so he was found to have preserved memory for the non-emotional parts of a story shown to him via a slideshow, but much worse memory for the emotional part of the story. So, this patient was taken, a particular slideshow was arranged which had a long story. Parts of that story were highly emotional, parts of that story were rather mundane, and it was found that because this person had amygdala damage, he had much worse memory for the emotional part of the information. Again, so it appears overall that emotional information may trigger mechanisms in the amygdala that will help us remember events that are associated with emotions. Again, remember, amygdala is one of the older brain structures, and recalling or processing emotional information might also have had evolutionary benefits for people. Say for example, things like a highly charged positively emotional event might have survival values, or highly charged negative event might have values about adaptation, that one has to adapt to a different kind of a setup. Now, another kind of memories, again part of the autobiographical thing, is the flashbulb memories. So, what are flashbulb memories? Say for example, if I ask you, if say for example you were in the US at that time, where were you, when did you, what were you doing when you first heard about the 9/11 attack? Or let us say closer to home, what were you doing when India won the 2011 Cricket World Cup? If I ask you questions like this, you might have some description, you might have some recollection of this particular event, and some of you might have a very vivid memory. I was at this place watching the match with my friends, we were having food, and we did this after India won the finals. Or we say for example went to a particular place for a party, all of these people were invited. So, these kind of memories, these are called flashbulb memories. Now, memories, if you try and define this, memories that refer to memory for circumstances surrounding hearing about highly charged events, but not the memory for the event itself. So, I am not really talking about the details of the match here, I am talking about what were you doing when you when India won the world. Say for example, you were at some place, somebody called you and told you this. You will not really have information about the event per se, but you will have information about what happened around that time when you heard this news. What happened when you first heard about the 9/11 attacks? What happened when you first heard about, let us say, the assassination of a particular assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, for example. These are some of the events that could be rather vivid, and they exist as flashes because you kind of remember a flash of all of that information in an instance. Now, according to Brown and Kulik, there is something special about the mechanism for these flashbulb memories. What is that? These memories not only occur under highly emotional circumstances, but are also remembered for longer periods of time. So, they would say that flashbulb memories are remembered for a much longer period of time than ordinary memories. They say for example, simple episodic or semantic memory kind of things. Also, they say that they are especially vivid and detailed. So, somebody could actually go in a lot of detail and tell you that I was doing these things, I was eating this, I was with these people when you called and told me, let us say, that India won the Cricket World Cup. So, they are referred to they refer to this particular mechanism as the now print mechanism, because you can really in detail you have everything organized, you just have to press print and all of that information will come out exactly as it happened at that point in time. Now, this is about what people have described about this. However, a lot of subsequent research has shown that although people report that these flashbulb memories are especially vivid and they tell that they are often very accurate, and I am very confident about this, a lot of research has shown that these events or these memories are rather inaccurate sometimes, and they lack a lot of details. So, I will describe an experiment of this kind. Say for example, Neisser and Harsh in 1992 did a study in which they asked the participants about how they had heard about the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger, and participants in this experiment, what they did was they filled out a questionnaire within the day after the explosion, and then filled out the same kind of questionnaire 2.5 to 3 years later. And it was found in this experiment that a large number of these participants, when they first reported hearing about the explanation at one place, let us say a pub or at somewhere, they later, after 2.5 to 3 years, change it to that of hearing on TV. So, I will say, for example, this is example. So, there is the response of one of the participants. So, I was in my religion class and some people walked in and started talking about it. I did not know about any details that it had exploded, and the school teachers and students had all been watching, which I thought was so sad. So, that was then after the class I went to my room and watched the TV program and learned about it. This is somebody's recall just one day after the event. After 2.5 to 3 years, 2.5 years later, the same person describes this event like this. So, when I first heard about the explosion, I was sitting in my freshman dorm room with my roommate and we were watching TV. It came on a news flash and then we learned about it. So, you see, after 2 to 3 years of age, people might not recall the exact events, exact circumstances surrounding that thing, but they might recall the event in some detail. So, that is something special about the flashbulb memories. Another experiment about flashbulb memories was done by Tallarico and Rubin in 2003. So, what they did was they tested a group of college students on September 12, 2001, a day after 9/11, and they asked them questions like, when did you first hear the news, and other similar questions about an everyday event that happened in a person's life that occurred in days just preceding that. So, two kinds of information were taken, one kind about the event and the other some normal mundane detail about where did you buy your milk from or something like that. Now, after picking the everyday event, the participant had to create a 2 to 3 words description that could act as a cue for the event in the future. Now, because this needs more help to be recalled. Now, some participants were retested 1 week later, some 6 weeks later and some 32 weeks later on both the events. Now, one of the results of this experiment was that the participants obviously remembered fewer details and made more errors at longer intervals after the events, with little difference between the normal everyday events and the flashbulb memory of 9/11, let us say. But another result was that it did indicate a difference between flashbulb, another finding indicates a difference between the flashbulb and everyday memory. What is this difference? The difference is about people's belief. So, what they find is that people's belief that their flashbulb memories were accurate stayed much higher for the flashbulb memories, but did not stay constant for the everyday event. So, I will show you the figure here. So, here you can see on the right side that people's belief about the everyday memory is much lower, but people's belief about the flashbulb memory being accurate on a 7-point rating scale still stays much higher. Their information in terms of detail might not be as good, but their belief in the fact that these memories are accurate was much better. Now, another experiment again about the 9/11 attacks, Davidson and co-workers in 2006 asked participants as questions such as how did you hear the news, where were you when you heard about the attack, and who was present at that point in time, and they also had participants again answer questions about an everyday event. The most interesting event that had occurred in the few days just preceding 9/11. Now, 1 year later, these participants were again contacted for a surprise memory test. They had no clue that their memory will be tested at the point the first test was taken, in which they were asked the same kind of questions. So, they were given 0 points if they could not remember the event at all or very inaccurately, 1 point if their memory was partially correct and less specific, and 2 points if it matched exactly the one they had made originally. A resulting congruence score was again determined by adding all these 3 scores. It was found that the congruence score for 9/11 memories was fairly high. Their confidence and their reportage is fairly high even 1 year later, but the score for everyday events goes much lower. It goes to from 0.77 for the flashbulb memories to 0.33 for the everyday events. Also, they found that whereas all the participants had no trouble remembering 9/11, only 65% of them were able to recall that everyday event which they had reported in the first instance. Here you can see the result. You will see that the percentage of people remembering something about the 9/11 was almost 100%, whereas only 65% of people remembered anything about the everyday event. Now, the result of both these studies, or the studies we have been describing till now, shows that memory for a flashbulb event does decline over time and are not like a photograph as it was earlier said. The poor recall of everyday events in the latter study could also be due to lack of good quality retrieval cues. You will see the study before this, we did have, the participants did create some of the cues themselves. So, therein you could not explain this because of this factor, but here they did not really have very good cues to remember the everyday events. Now, better memory for events like 9/11 might also probably be due to two characteristics. First, that these events are highly emotionally charged events, so they are better stored, better organized in the brain. The second is because these events get the benefit of added rehearsal. Now, this benefit of added rehearsal is referred to in the narrative rehearsal hypothesis, and where does this rehearsal come from? It comes from a lot of discussion about these kind of events. If it is a public event, you would have experienced it in your own way, then you would have read about it in the newspaper, then you would have seen it on the television, then you would have participated in a discussion about that event. So, what happens is time and again there is this rehearsal, there is this narrative rehearsal that is happening. Sometimes you are participating in it, sometimes there are other people in your just party listening to it. So, that rehearsal kind of revises this whole event again and again, and your memory becomes better for each of these events. But you remember this, the number of rehearsal that are happening, the number of ways the story is changing, you might also be entertaining or including some of the false information about this as well. Now, talking about false information, there is a certain fact that the memory has a very constructive nature. You do not remember everything verbatim as it happened. You might say, for example, add a lot of things yourself based on what your expectations are, based on what you think about it. But somebody to describe an event wherein a best friend and a person whom you don't like were involved, maybe they were having a quarrel, and you are asked to relate this quarrel to somebody else, maybe even just one day after the event happened. Your description might contain facts that absolve your friend of any guilt and put all the guilt on the person you did not like so much, and it goes on, and it kind of creeps in as a misinformation. So, there is a very interesting experiment that Frederick Bartlett did. It is called the War of Ghosts experiment. It was published in 1932, but had been done much earlier than World War I. So, what happens is participants come to the room. They read this passage about the War of Ghosts, wherein there are two gentlemen who go to a particular river, and one of these gentlemen, and they say a canoe, 5-6 people coming out of it from the river, and they tell that we are going to make war and would you join us. So, one of these people says that I have no arrows. So, he tells to the other person that I have no arrows and I have not informed anybody at home where I am going, so you should follow these people. The other person follows these people, goes to a place where there is apparently some war and they are fighting. Suddenly somebody is hit with an arrow. It's this second young man who had gone with these people, and as soon as this person is hit with the arrow, these people disappear, they go somewhere, and this person says, oh, maybe these people I have come here with were ghosts. So, he comes back, he talks to his people, he says that I went with the ghost to fight a war and somebody was hit, but I am completely fine. The next day he wakes up, he kind of spits blood and dies. So, again this event people were reading, and Bartlett basically asked them to follow something called repeated reproduction, in which the same participants came back a number of times and they tried to remember the same story at longer and longer intervals after they had first read it. So, at longer times what happens is, after reading the story, the participants were forgetting most of the accurate information from the passage. So, what they were doing is they were adding information out of their own head into this thing, and the story was kind of getting changed and changed again and again after every reproduction. That is pretty much what happens with a lot of news stories you would hear every day, a lot of how rumors really travel faster and faster, because again this is the nature of memory. Memory is constructive by itself, and you are bound to add something or the other from your own side, knowingly / unknowingly, almost all the time. So, these kind of changes in the story could have happened because the participants are creating the memories from two sources. First is the original stories, and the second is whatever knowledge they have. Say, for example, if somebody has some stereotypical knowledge that this would have happened, they are kind of adding something here. Now, this idea specifically that people are adding something here calls for something called source monitoring. What is source monitoring? Source monitoring basically is the process of determining the origins of our memories or the knowledge or our beliefs. Say for example, what is the best rumor you heard since couple of days? Where did you hear this rumor from? Did you experience it? Did somebody tell you? Did you read it in the gossip magazine? Where did you get this? Now, source monitoring errors are also called source misattributions. You misattribute the particular memory to a wrong source. Now, source monitoring involves an example of the constructive nature of memory, because when we remember something, we are usually retrieving the memory first, and then you are using a decision process to really check where did this memory come from, where did I get this knowledge about. A lot of times you will see people wondering, who told me this? Did I read about it somewhere? Did somebody tell me? Those kind of things you will see people wondering about. Now, source monitoring errors are rather common. It happens with everybody all the time, but some of them could be rather sensational. Say for example, there is a case of cryptomnesia happened with George Harrison, who was part of the Beatles band, and he was basically sued for appropriating the melody of a particular song from Beatles, He's So Fine, which is basically a song which figured out in a much earlier album from the group called the Chiffons. And the point is, when the discussion happened, he said that I had been hearing this song so much that I thought that it is mine. So, it is again a misattribution that happened, and it led the person to believe that this is exactly the memory he created himself. So, these could be things. There are again cases of piracy that happen all the time, but again some of them could be not really mistakes. Somebody genuinely believes that this is what they have created. Now, source monitoring errors are important because the mechanisms that lead to these source monitoring errors or source misattributions are generally the same mechanisms that lead to the formation of our memories in general. So, if you are saying that you are suffering from a source monitoring error, if you are prone to making so many source monitoring errors, it might be a good idea to really check for everything that you have to say at some point, because that is the same process that you are using to describe anything in general. All the memories you have in general probably then are suffering from some kind of error. So, you might want to recheck before you assert something so confidently in a particular scenario. Now, Johnson describes memory as a process that makes use of a number of types of information. He says that there are at least two kinds of information that you might be building upon. First is the primary source of information, that is information about the actual event. If you were there, if you were a party to the event, if you were experiencing it firsthand, that is one. The second is additional sources of information, things like your knowledge of the world, the preceding events that might have. Say for example, again I take the example of quarrel. Suppose one of the parties involved in quarrel, you do not like that person so much, or you just hate that person. Automatically your description will start containing information that will put that person at guilt, even though there is no guilt of that person involved. So, you are bound to in your descriptions of the event bring in some of your personal bias and kind of color the event in that way. So, this is something which we have to be very careful about. An experiment was about the same thing, was done by Jacob and co-workers in 1989, and it demonstrates the effect of source monitoring by testing the participants' ability to distinguish between famous and non-famous faces. So, what happened was, in the acquisition part of the experiment, the participants read a number of non-famous names, things like Sebastian Weisdorf, or anything for that matter. You can take Indian names also if you want to imagine this. Now, in the immediate test, which happened just after the participants saw the list of these non-famous names, they also saw a list of non-famous faces. Participants were told to pick out the names of famous people from a list of non-famous names they had just seen, new non-famous names that they had not seen earlier, and some of the famous names. What happens here is that just before this test, they were told that all of the names they had seen in the first part were all non-famous. So, everything they said, that everything was non-famous. Because the test had been given immediately, participants would correctly recognize most of the non-famous, older non-famous names that they were exposed to earlier. In the delayed test, 24 hours later, what happened? They were tested again on the list of same names. Participants were more likely to recognize the old non-famous names as famous. So, what they are doing is, they are doing this misattribution error. So, you read this, participants in the first phase read non-famous names, then they read non-famous names from the acquisition plus new non-famous names and new famous names. Immediately if you tested, they would recall the non-famous names much easily. But if they are tested after 24 hours, they will actually take some of the non-famous names and identify them as famous names. So, what they are doing is after 24 hours, they are already mixing the fact that some of these names are famous or some of these names are non-famous. Now, source monitoring also, as I was saying, stereotypes has also been found to be affected with things like gender stereotypes. Say for example, Marsh and co-workers in 2006 showed that people's performance on source monitoring tests can be influenced by gender stereotypes. I will show you the example. Say for example, I say a statement like I like baseball and I tell you that this was said by Chris. Then I give you a break and I give you a puzzle. Chris is male, Pat is female, gender is now revealed. Then I ask you, who would have said I like baseball? 90% of the time you might say Chris, because Chris is the male person. You can adapt this to an Indian setting as well. I like some adventure sport and then I say this person is male, this person female, who would have said it? Because it is considered stereotypically that most of the adventure sports might be liked by men. So, you might attribute the male name to that statement even though that might be incorrect. So, that is one way. The results do indicate in this and some other experiments that gender labels did affect the participants' memory judgment. 83% of the masculine statements were associated with the male, but only 65% of the masculine statements were associated with the female, and in the reverse case as well. Now, here you can see masculine statement, male name, better thing, feminine statements, female name, less of the association. Now, real world knowledge also affects memory formation as people make inferences about the stuff based on their experiences and knowledge. In a very classic experiment, Bransford and Johnson had participants read a number of action statements in the acquisition part of the experiment and then tested their memory for the same statements later. So, things like experimental group read, John was trying to fix the birdhouse, he was pounding the nail when his father came out to watch him and help him do the work. The control group would read, John was trying to fix the birdhouse, he was looking for the nail when his father came out to watch him and help him do the work. Now, they were given a test statement, John was using a hammer to fix the birdhouse when his father came out to watch him and help him do the work. Now, the participants were asked a test question that whether you saw this sentence before. So, you will see this sentence here did have the word hammer, while in the other two did not mention hammer at all, but one was about pounding, one was about looking for the nail. Participants in the experimental group said that they had previously seen 57% of these test statements. So, if there was pounding involved, they would say that I have seen the hammer 57% of the time as compared to the control group. Why? Because of the word pounding used in the first statement herein, participants would infer directly that if he was pounding the nail, he must have been doing it with the hammer. So, they automatically infer the role of the hammer there. So, this is the experimental design. You will see acquisition phase, read pounding nails and some other sentences. Test, have you seen this sentence before? The test sentence has hammer, they will say yes 57% of the time. In the control part, looking for the nail, have you seen this sentence before? Has hammer, only 20% of the people. So, sometimes this kind of information or your knowledge of the world might also influence your memories. Now, an interesting effect about this is the misinformation effect. The misleading information presented after a person witnesses an event can change how the person describes that event later. This is called the misinformation effect. So, a classic experiment about this was done by Loftus and co-workers in 1978, wherein participants saw a series of slides in which a car stops at a stop sign and then turns around the corner and hits a pedestrian. So, some of the participants then answered questions about questions like, did another car pass the red Datsun while it was stopped at the stop sign, or they were asked, did another car pass the red Datsun while it was passed the yield sign. Now, yield sign they don't really had to stop. Those in this misinformation group were more likely to say that they had seen the picture of the car stop at the yield sign. So, they are kind of making this misinformation effect. Another experiment, Loftus and Palmer, they basically showed participants films of a car crash and then asked either how fast the participants were going when they smashed the car into each other, or how fast the cars were going when they hit into each other. Later, participants were asked to estimate the speeds of the car. In the smash group, they estimated the car speed to be around 41 miles per hour, while in the hit group, they estimated the speed of the car only to be about 31 miles per hour. So, you see, the word is also influencing their memory or their description of the event. Here is the figure of that experiment. Now, MPI, basically the misinformation effect, kind of has three explanations. It first says that it kind of replaces so misinformation kind of replaces the original memory. So, according to the memory trace replacement hypothesis, which states that MPI kind of impairs or replaces memories that were formed during the original experience of the event. The other thing could be that this original information is forgotten because of retroactive interference. So, new information is causing information on the interference on the older information, which occurs when more recent information interferes with memory for older information. Also, it could be because of source monitoring errors. So, according to the source monitoring hypothesis, the person incorrectly concludes that the second information is the one that is actually the one they have experienced. So, these three factors could be those that have affected the person's memory. Another important factor here is the eyewitness testimony. Now, testimony by an eyewitness, as I was talking in the beginning about a crime, can also be affected by these misinformation effect. So, eyewitness testimony, however, is considered to be one of the most convincing types of evidence to a particular jury, but unfortunately, a lot of research has shown that a lot of times many innocent people have been incarcerated based on mistaken identification by eyewitnesses. So, these errors might be caused due to a variety of reasons, difficulty in perceiving the person's face and others which lead to inaccurate memory for what was perceived. An example is errors with attention. A lot of times when weapon is involved in the crime scene, participants mistakenly focus all their attention to the weapon, and because of this faulty use of attention, they don't remember, they don't see the perpetrator's face in most cases, and they will in that sense misidentify the perpetrator a lot of times. So, that is one. Stanley and Johnson did this experiment. They studied weapons focus by measuring how well the participants remember the details of a simulated crime. They found that participants were more likely to recall the details of the perpetrator in a no shoot condition versus in a shoot condition where there was a weapon and which was allowed to shoot. So, here is the figurative of that experiment. Now, also errors could be due to familiarity. A very interesting case happened. A ticket agent at a railway station was robbed and they subsequently identified a sailor as being the robber. Later, the sailor showed that he was not at that particular place, and this ticket agent was asked, "Why did you recognize this sailor?" The person says that this sailor seemed too familiar. Now, the sailor seemed familiar because he was living very near to the station and every day bought ticket from the ticket agent. So, sometimes familiarity could also lead to errors, and errors like these which the person would not even know of. A lot of times persons would be very convinced that no, this is the exact person that has committed this particular crime. So, I hope this is telling you that our memories are not always accurate, but actually seldom accurate, and one has to be double sure, triple sure of what you are saying. Where is this information actually coming from? Now, in a paper titled "Good, You Identified the Suspect," Wells and Bradfield did this very nice experiment. They had the participants view the video of an actual crime and then asked them to identify the perpetrator from a photo spread. Now, the photo spread does not really contain the actual perpetrator. All of the participants picked one of the photographs as following their choice, and they received either a confirming feedback, a neutral feedback, or a disconfirming feedback. It was shown that people who received a confirming feedback actually identified and were very confident of their choice, even though the photo spread did not actually contain the perpetrator. This is called the post identification feedback effect, and this is something which creates a serious problem in the criminal justice system, because jurors are strongly influenced by the level of confidence that these eyewitnesses might have in their testimony. So, again, something to think about. Also, you might have seen in a lot of movies involving the court that the effect of post questioning is also very important. So, in other questions, Chan and co-workers, they basically considered this question, and they did that how does taking a recall test after witnessing an event before being exposed to misleading post event information influence the memory. So, what has happened is there is an event happened, and then you ask a lot of questions about that event to the person, and the person kind of tells you that whatever he remembers. So this is the schematic. View a tape from 24, a criminal thriller series, take a cued recall test, give some misinformation, take a cued recall test. After that, 50% of the people are affected by the misinformation. View the 24 tape, play some game, something else, give misinformation, take a cued recall test. Only 20% of the people are affected by the misinformation. So it shows that a lot of times taking an extra test, doing this extra recall exercise, which might be done a lot of times when somebody is in court, also leads to problems. So if after immediately a harrowing crime scene have happened and police have come and they are questioning the person again and again, might lead to misinformation, might lead to somebody being prone to misinformation. Now, why is this reverse testing effect happening? This reverse testing effect basically shows that taking a recall test right after seeing a particular program or an event might make you more sensitive to misinformation. Now, if you are wondering why this more sensitiveness to misinformation is happening, you might want to recall the last part of the previous lecture wherein we were talking about reconsolidation. So, when you are actually going over a particular event again and again, the memory would become fragile, it would become susceptible to change, and then if somebody gives you a misinformation, somebody says something, you might be affected by that. So, that is the whole point about everyday memories. I probably showed you a lot of evidence that shows that our memory is not accurate all the time, rather it is seldom accurate, and one has to be double sure and very sure of where you are getting your descriptions from, where your memory is being sourced from. I will thank you for this lecture. We will talk about other topics in the next class. Thank you.